Hello EPQ students. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. However, rather than delay, I thought it best to plough on with a video lesson. So today we're going to look at the production log and writing your project proposal. You'll have looked at the production log briefly last week in your session with Mr. Oswald. What is the production log? Well, the production log is a very important document that's used to record your journey as a student through the EPQ process. It's not an admin document as many students see it, but rather it provides you with the backbone of your project. As a result, because the project qualifications are a process-based qualification, yes, it's true that your report, your essay is very important. The production log, though, is equally as important because it charts your progress through from your initial ideas, through your research to your final outcome in terms of your report, but also your evaluation. It is an immensely important document which really highlights and showcases your journey all the way through your EPQ, which otherwise you wouldn't necessarily see in terms of your final outcome, in terms of your report. So please, don't make the mistake that lots of students make, is to think the production log is unimportant, that it's something that, it's a drag, it's just something that I have to fill in, and focus all of your time on the essay. I've marked EPQ projects where the essay, the report, has been absolutely outstanding, but unfortunately the production log has been very, very poor or very weak. People have given it lip service or haven't really devoted much time to it. So they haven't come out with a very good grade because although their report was outstanding, the production log was poor. What about the assessment criteria in line with the production log? Can you make sure that you consider the assessment criteria when completing your production logs? So it'll become obvious throughout your production log because the general sort of format is that you will have a supervisor meeting, and following your supervisor meeting you will need to fill in something on your log. But when you're filling in your log, you need to make sure that you are focused on the assessment objectives, which we'll go over later on. And you need to have that in mind when you're completing the relevant section of the log. The log is completely designed by the exam board, AQA, and it's designed to provide you with appropriate prompts and questions and thinking points for each section. So if you answer the question or respond to the statement at the start of each question thoroughly, you'll be on your way to completing a production log which is of a very, very high quality. So I think you're getting the idea here, but the purpose of a project proposal, which is part of the production log, it'll be one of the first key parts that you write, other than your sort of initial ideas. There is a section in the production log for you to log your initial ideas, but this is to explain how your initial ideas, how you will research your project and why you want to complete it. It is a rigorous academic document which allows your supervisor, but also the EPQ coordinator, Mr. Oswald, to see your thinking and to see whether your project will be feasible within the timescale. Because lots of students will either plan too much as part of their EPQ, something that they can't get done within the time frame, or too little. And hopefully your supervisor will guide you and will advise you with respect to this. But you really need to think carefully about your timings and how you will research your project over the timescale that you've got. what an academic research proposal would look like at a university or a research institute would look very much like the bullet points on screen. There'll be some kind of proposed project title, some sort of abstract which will outline essentially what, in very maybe 50 words or so, what the point of this particular project is. Any relevant prior learning or prior research which is out there, your motivations for doing that research, as well as key questions, and what your proposed methodology and sources would be, at least initially. As you know, this can and indeed does change, and this, what's on this slide, is purely for information only for those of you who are thinking about going on to university to do some research at university. However, it's useful to have this at the back of your mind, because the project proposal, which is part of the production log, is really sort of modelled on this particular, like an academic style project proposal like you'd see at university. So how's it all going to work then? Well, hopefully Mr. Oswald will have shown you this slide last week, but here's your timeline for the EPQ, which is important. It's important to realise what the score is and where you're sort of going with the project. So at the moment, I'm teaching you the skills element, which will be over November and December of this year. One of the first things you'll do back if you decide to go ahead with the EPQ after Christmas is you will start an initial sort of planning. You'll have an initial plan, an initial planning meeting with your supervisor, which will begin in early January. You then need to write your project proposal after you've written in that record of your initial planning. And that project proposal will have very much fed into the meeting that you've had with your supervisor. And again, that needs to be completed by mid-January. It then needs to be submitted to your supervisor for review, who will then send it on to Mr. Oswald as the coordinator. And that needs to be done in early February. You'll then go away once you've had approval for your project and start researching and carrying out the things that you said in your initial project plan. And you'll have a mid-project review sort of in March or April. These dates are relatively flexible because you will be talking to your supervisors and booking in meetings, and it will depend on when you can book in meetings with your supervisors. However, the idea is that you get a vague plan in place for the overall project and the months in which it falls. So you'll hopefully have finished writing by mid-May and have a final meeting with your supervisor. There will be meetings interdispersed within this. Your summary will have commenced hopefully at the end of May, and in June you'll be working on your presentation and reflection following your presentation. It's then simply a case of making sure that everything is sorted in terms of the administration. We will then, as your supervisors, will mark your projects over the summer holiday and will moderate it in September. They will be submitted to the exam board in November, and you'll get your results in January of 2022, which I know sounds like it's a long way away, but it's only really just over a year away. So your project proposal, you need to have a proposed project title. And the best titles are phrased as questions. For example, what are the causes of? I evaluate the effectiveness of. They use instruction words like evaluate to kind of look at what are the benefits or drawbacks of something, to analyse, to get down into the nitty-gritty and see what's happening, to assess, to consider. The important thing with your project title is to be specific. So a very poor question is one which is a general question, which, for instance, might be something like this: does space travel do more harm than good? That's very, very vague because there's no timescale set out here. It's not terribly specific. Well, what do you mean by space travel? There are lots of different means of space travel. And what do you mean by does more harm than good? In what context? So a much better specific question would be to assess the extent to which the financial and political benefits of the NASA Space Shuttle program from 1972 to 2011 outweigh the financial and environmental problems. So you're very, very quickly outlining the scope of your project. You're looking at the financial and political benefits of one particular space program, which is the American space program, NASA, from 1972 to 2011, and you're thinking about it in the context of the financial problems and environmental problems as a result. Your question should allow you to access higher level thinking skills, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment in terms of those higher level thinking skills. What and how? Well, your project proposal should be a very short summary which introduces your topic and your project as a whole. You need to refer to what you will study as well as why you want to study it. So yes, you need some sort of research question, but you also need to explain your motivations. For example, it might be that you are thinking about going on to do a career in medicine. So as a result, your EPQ project might be something in a medical related area, whether it's sort of a biological question or a chemical question or even a medical question itself. And you will go into a lot more detail in terms of your production log and your plan. But what your project proposal does is it's an introductory review. You need to write in the third person and future tense. So I would say this project will examine the causes of, let's say, a volcanic eruption in such and such, not just I am examining the causes of the volcanic eruption. It's important to write in an academic style, but it's also important to recognise, and this is what people struggle with because it seems like it's at cross purposes, that the production log is your journey of your project. It is what you are going to do. It is what you are planning, what steps are going to be taken next. But nevertheless, it's good training to write in the third person and future tense because it is a plan and it is something that as a project what's going to drive the project forward, if you like. You also need to outline as part of your production log and your project proposal what prior learning you have and what areas of personal interest and what courses of study you're currently planning. And we'll look at this in the context of a completed production log. So you need to explain what you've already learned that will help you with this project. So where are you coming from? What do you already know about this area? What's prompted your interest? You will also need to say how your school studies will help you with this project. It's also important that you need to outline what A-levels you're doing because this is an extended project qualification. It can't be something that you are directly studying on any of your other A-levels or your BTECs or anything else like that. It must be something that is independent of that. It can be related to it, but you cannot study something that is specifically on your syllabus, on your specification in those studies, in those A-levels. And remember that your project can be linked to your previous studies and indeed the studies that you're doing at the minute, but it shouldn't be a repetition of any coursework that you've done in the past because this is plagiarism and plagiarism gets you no marks. It also is treated very seriously by the exam board and by universities. And it can result, if you do plagiarise even your own work as well as the work of others, it will mean that you will have the potential to be withdrawn from your exams because it's akin to cheating and it's treated very, very seriously. Prior learning, just by the way, is both the skills that you've acquired as well as the knowledge that you have. Key questions then. Some people, when they're planning out their project or getting some ideas for their project, find it helpful just to list a few questions, maybe 3, that you'll aim to answer as part of your project. So, for example, what were the financial costs of the Space Shuttle program? That's a very important question in light of the overall research question that we've hinted at previously. So the other thing that you might want to think about, what are the financial benefits of the Space Shuttle program? Lots of people talk about the spin-off technologies that have resulted of the Space Shuttle program, and there are lots and lots which has benefited humanity greatly, even if it hasn't directly benefited NASA. You also, as part of your project proposal, need to think about your research methodology and what sources you're going to do and what sources you're going to use. So your methodology is how you will carry out your research project. And I'm going to just highlight this word here, how. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Are you going to do some experiments? Are you going to take some questionnaires? You don't need to have a project that's based purely on primary research. It can be based on secondary research. But even in your secondary research, what's that going to look like in terms of your sources? Are you going to exclusively read sources online or in the library? Are you going to talk to a prominent professor or academic who works in the area in which you're interested? Who are you going to talk to help you to design an experiment? Or are you going to use other sources, other similar experiments for inspiration? You might be carrying out social research in terms of questionnaires. How are you going to ensure that they are not biased in any way, shape, or form? And the more sources that you use, the better your project will be. It's really important that you use a wide range of both primary and secondary sources when you are examining your EPQ question. You will also, as part of your production, I'll give some examples of what your sources might be. So, for instance, you may have decided that you're going to a university library, and so you will look at some books from a university library like Derby or Nottingham, if that's possible, given the current situation. But also you might think, well, I'm going to use a mixture of newspapers, online journals, websites, journal articles, textbooks, everything and anything, but you need to be explicit about where you will find your sources. And sources don't just have to be paper materials or online materials. They can also be people. They can be that you're going to hold an interview with a doctor or a professor or somebody who is an expert in their field. Let's look at a project proposal then. Here's an anonymous one from a project a few years ago. You can see that the candidate has created a working title of the extended project. It will be a working title to begin with, guys, because over the course of your project, the title may well change, and it's fine if it does change. However, it may not, so it's important to try and get the question right the first time. So this candidate has put, how will the introduction of autonomous vehicles affect business models and tertiary sector change in the UK, including legislation, insurance and employment impacts compared to US autonomous truck transport initiatives? So it's clear it's to do with autonomous vehicles, it's to do with business models, and legislation, insurance and employment, and comparing the UK to the US. This candidate's also put down their initial sources. They've said a wide variety of sources from Google Scholar articles, from professional experts, internet reports, including government bodies and transport research bodies, news articles, and secondary data will be supported by primary data. So this candidate interviewed academic professors and manufacturers in both the UK and the US. So a clear working title with a clear scope and plenty of initial resources. Then the candidate's gone on to talk about the courses of study and areas of personal interest to which the topic relates, and that she's talked about the trend of deindustrialisation and threat of autonomy, which has been looming over society for a very long time. And yet it's such an innovative product with autonomous cars that it will be one of the key products in her lifetime that will revolutionise social trends, both in terms of car manufacturing and in terms of secondary and tertiary job sectors as a whole. And she's thinking already about the positives and negatives, so she's evaluating what this will mean through exploring legal and business skills, which is what this particular candidate wanted to go on and study at university. They wanted to go on and study business and law. In terms of the intended product, they've written about how they want to write a report which will be supported by a range of both primary and secondary data for a clear judgment. The data that she's going to use will include the values of experts to enhance forecasted predictions. Again, this was an interesting EPQ because usually one wouldn't necessarily write about future predictions. One would think about the past, but given that she's asking experts, it was particularly interesting and perfectly reasonable, given that she was thinking about this in the context of revolutions that had happened previously. At the end of her project, she aims to have explored the likely significance of this technological advancement on the UK economy for both citizens as consumers, but also manufacturers and employees of the car industry. And she's saying that she will have findings with a detailed evaluation, explanation and analysis of the predicted implications for the UK. So all of that in a 5,000 word essay, which is what you should be aiming for, is jolly, jolly impressive. As a final point, the candidate has outlined the A-levels that she studied. This is important because you want to make sure that there is overlap, sure, but that you're not covering anything that's directly on those specifications. If you are unsure of whether your project will be completely covered by your specification, please ask your teachers. They will be able to help you and they will be able to tell you. But obviously there's nothing in English, business or geography that directly relates to autonomous vehicles. So this was an absolutely perfect project, ripe for study, because there was nothing covered on any of her A-levels on this particular scope. We talked earlier about higher level thinking skills, which is what the EPQ is designed to promote. So in your GCSEs, you started out down here knowing things. You will remember some key facts. What hopefully your GCSEs will have gotten you to do is to understand those facts, to be able to describe and to be able to explain. So describe is, what are those key facts? How can we describe them? How can we explain those key facts? The higher level thinking skills, which A-levels are designed to promote, and to a certain extent GCSE you will have been applying what you know to new situations, but these are the higher level thinking skills. Applying is applying what you know to unfamiliar situations, but we'll go through what analyse, evaluate and create mean next. So to create, or sometimes you'll see it on some slides as synthesis, is the hardest skill. It is to come up with new ideas, new theories, new experiments based on what your knowledge, your understanding, your application, your analysis, your evaluation and so on. It's at the very top of that pyramid in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. Evaluate means to consider the strengths and the weaknesses of an idea, the positive and negative points, and to come up with a conclusion about something as a result. In other words, a balanced argument. What lots of people can do readily is consider the good things and bad things, the advantages and disadvantages of something. However, what they're not very good at doing is coming up with an overall conclusion, an overall judgment based on what you have learned over the course of your project. A judgment is very important, a conclusion which is part of an evaluation. To analyse is to investigate a topic in detail, looking at the causes, the results, what is the impact of something. Again, if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge at the bottom, then understanding, applying that understanding to unfamiliar situations, to analyse that information by having looked at it in detail, to evaluate, consider what are the positives and negatives, and to come out with a judgment and to create something new. This is the hardest skill here at the top, to create or sort of propose new ideas, new theories, new experiments and so on as a result of your experiment or as a result of your project. What's really important throughout your project is to simply do more than just describe. A description is just what is happening. Don't just try to describe or even just try to explain something. We want you to try and evaluate and analyse it. It's important that you recognise that you need to start with a description and then an explanation, but that should feed into an evaluation and an analysis as well, thinking about that triangle in terms of those higher level thinking skills. Assessment objectives, weightings then. Hopefully Mr. Oswald will have gone through this with you last week, but you're essentially assessed in 4 key areas throughout your project. Assessment objective 1, which is the management of your project, which constitutes 20% of the marks. The second assessment objective is the use of your resources, and that's 20% of the marks. Whereas the third assessment objective is to develop and realise. This is what we're talking about when we're thinking about the production log. Really, these 2 strands here, AO1 and AO3, is to manage. How are you managing the project? What's your plan, which this really EPQ lesson feeds into? What's your plan? What's your design of your project? How are you identifying the areas that you need to look at? The best EPQ projects not only plan what's going to happen and designed what's happened or what you're going to do based on a range of skills and different methods, but also it develops that and realizes that and says, how are you going to achieve those planned outcomes? And makes a log of that in terms of, okay, this is what I need to do next. This is how it went. And this is what I'm going to do next as a result. It's developing and it's realizing it. Don't get me wrong, you can get all of these assessment objectives in the production log, but the biggest chunk you can see here, 40% of the marks, are for developing and realizing your project. You will, as part of your project log, talk about the resources that you're going to use. You will, at the end, review all aspects of your project in terms of the stated objectives and so on. But you need to make sure that your production log, you have a plan, you're designing things as you're going on, you're responding to problems, so you will hit problems. There will be things that you've planned that maybe haven't quite worked out in quite the way you'd hoped, or maybe you couldn't do it for logistical reasons or what have you. But it's how you make decisions to overcome those issues to achieve what you've planned. I hope that's clear. When you're carrying out your EPQ, there's lots of this in terms of planning. That's as part of your production log, and your production log is designed to help you to manage your time and to help you to plan out what you're going to do. However, it's important that you use additional documents to help you. And there's various things that you can do. You can create a list of things that you need to do and sort of tick them off as you go. However, I'm going to show you a couple of different things which you may find helpful to you when planning out your project, and you can see how this is beneficial and how it will help you to plan your project, and we can award a raft of marks for these in addition to the production log. So I'm going to show you a couple of Gantt charts. Gantt charts are ways of managing a project in any way, shape or form. If you are working on any sort of project management, a project manager will use a series of Gantt charts to make sure that the project is on course and to know what needs to happen and when. So here is an example of a Gantt chart for somebody who's writing an EPQ on that's very literary, which is looking at a series of books and an analysis of some books, whatever it might well be. It's obviously very broad. And there's a timeline along here with a series of dates. And where they've blocked out, that's something where they're going to carry out that particular activity. So in this case, they've put a 400-word summary, and they're saying that over these 2 weeks, these are weeks commencing, that's what they're going to do over those 2 weeks. At the same time, they're going to be carrying on with this next activity because these things overlap. And then they're going to start reading here. Well, you can't start reading your second book until you finished your first one. So then the second one, the third one, the fourth one will come on. But at the same time as reading, this particular student is going to be collecting quotes from these books to help them with their EPQ. So any of these boxes that overlap is where several things are going to be happening at once. But obviously there is a progression here, because they start writing once they've concluded their research, and then they're going to write some drafts and some second drafts and so on, so that there's a clear progression here over time in terms of what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. In general, this is another kind of Gantt chart. This is one that's a bit more specific with over the course of a whole year. So you've got kind of the months here and the project stages. They've split it up into 1, 2, 3, 4 different stages and so on. They're writing their topic title over 2 months. They've taken into consideration some exam leave, which at Woodlands we won't have. So they've even built in when their exams are happening, when they're going to do their research, what their research is going to look like, when they're going to start writing their dissertation after they've planned it as a result of doing this reading, and so on. Hopefully this makes sense in light of your project. I'm aware, guys, that obviously I'm not there with you face to face to give you the opportunity to ask me questions and so on. However, please do contact me through Teams. Just, find me, Dr. Norton, through Teams and ask me any questions, or you can email me as well at my email address. Just again, search for me in Outlook or your email client. Or failing that, you can come and find me next week when I will be back in school. Thank you ever so much for your attention. I hope that this has been really useful. And if you've got any questions, you know where to find me. Thank you.